Welcome back to Newsflash. Today, we're continuing our series discussing Operation Car Wash, the biggest corruption scandal ever to hit Brazil, South America, or probably even the world in recent memory. In today's part, we're discussing that moment when the prosecutors, the ones doing all the stopping of the corruption, become those being accused. But first, before we get into any of that, it's important to remember the political context at play here. Let's start with Lula. He was probably one of the biggest people, if not by far and away, the biggest person and most consequential person to be imprisoned. He was born in a rural part of Brazil and grew up in intense poverty as a factory worker, losing a finger there at a very young age. During Brazil's brutal military regime, Lula led major strikes and worked his way up through the ranks to a presidential campaign that was finally successful in 2002, winning an amazing 61.3% of the vote. Once elected, he all but eliminated hunger, lifted millions out of poverty, and was a fearless advocate for the workers of Brazil, every man, the person who needed support after years of brutal military dictatorship and right-wing rule. He served as a beacon of hope for poor and working-class Brazilians. The idea that someone who is the son of illiterate farmers could not read until he was 10 years old, could grow up to become a union leader, work his way up through Brazilian politics, eventually become Brazil's most powerful person was incredible and awe-inspiring to them and still is today to many people, both in Brazil and around the world. In office, he enjoyed approval of as high as 87% of the population until he left office in 2010 due to term limits. In a further testament to the popularity of PT, or the Workers' Party, Dilma Rousseff, Lula's close ally, someone who worked with Lula as a guerrilla fighter against Brazil's dictatorship in the 70s and 80s and was arrested for it, was elected after Lula in 2010 and re-elected in 2014. The PT, seemingly unstoppable, had the support of Brazil a lot, until Parliament. The only institution that seemed to have the support of Brazil more than the Workers' Party was the small band of prosecutors in Curitiba, led by Deltan Dallagnol and presided over by the judge Sergio Moro, who were taking a blowtorch to Brazilian political establishment, and that included the Workers' Party. It turns out, though, they were also doing an incredible favor to the right-wing and rich and powerful Brazil, who, until that time, had been out of power for more than a decade. The right couldn't nail them specifically in the car wash investigation, but in May of 2016, Dilma was impeached over accusations that she moved budget funds from one government account to another, something that many other presidents have done before, and even people on the opposition have said wasn't an impeachable offense. Discontent, especially among PT supporters, was growing, as they found this politically dubious, to say the least. After Dilma was booted, her vice president, Michel Temer, took over. This was in the midst of Operation Car Wash, and it's important to understand the kind of fever that was gripping the country. Just someone who they could trust, someone who could be returned to normalcy, because this really started to happen. Dilma got reelected and soon impeached right in the midst of the car wash scandal, because keep in mind, 2014 was when it started. 2014 was the year Dilma got reelected, and by 2016 she was impeached. So this was really all kind of happening at once. The vice president, I guess, as I said, Michel Temer, took over, and he really knew what he needed to do. He needed to gain back the trust of the people of Brazil, who had so lost their faith in government, as we talked about in last episode, and really wanted some sort of radical change. And Michel Temer, he started off kind of on the right foot. He asked for some sort of trust, I guess you could say, for the people, and a government of, quote, national salvation. He quickly went against that, though, by destroying everything Lula did for Brazil. Temer was part of the PDBM, an opposition part of the PT, the Workers' Party, so I guess that could make sense, but Temer went after pension plans, overhauled labor laws, and curbed public spending on social safety net. These were huge things that added to the prosperity of the everyday person living in Brazil. They were, these programs that Temer either got rid of or cut back on in a pretty substantial way. They were what made Lula probably one of the most successful presidents ever in the 20th century, the 21st century, in recent memory, really. I mean, people actually have said it about him. Probably one of the most effective world leaders ever. And that's pretty high praise. And it was largely because of what he did for the people who grew up like he did. The middle-class people, the poorer people in the country of Brazil that he looked out for, really for the first time ever. Those changes brought about massive success and massive prosperity to these people, but they were all taken away by Temer. Not all of them, at least, but if they weren't taken away, they were substantially cut back on. And that was truly devastating. Also pretty devastating for people the world over was he allowed private mining companies into the Amazon, although he was pretty unpopular, so after that bill was challenged, it quickly died, luckily for everyone. But still, in December of 2016, the government of national salvation came crashing down, and our good friend Marcelo Odebrecht admitted to paying bribes to President Michel Temer. Car wash had come for Temer in a more direct way than it ever had come for Lula or for Dilma Rousseff, but because of the fact that the way the Brazilian kind of constitution works, you have to bring your impeachment proceeding. You're going to bring your impeachment push. And this is what was happening at around 2015 and 2016. This was taking place December 2015, more specifically. Impeachment proceeding against Temer was filed, but his fellow party member, president of the Chamber of Deputies, remember this name, Eduardo Cunha, he blocked the movement and instead allowed impeachment proceedings against Dilma Rousseff. So that was not the best of moves, because after Supreme Court Judge Mello ruled Cunha's actions to be improper, he suggested that Temer should face impeachment proceedings himself. Another attempt to impeach Temer began with the decision on April 6th of 2016 by the President of Deputies to form a commission for termination analysis of liability. That's what it's called. Very fancy there. In other words, pretty much requests of impeachment that were delivered kind of rapid fire at Cunha, but nothing really stuck until May 17th of 2017. This is, again, after Marcelo Odebrecht admitted to paying bribes to Michel Temer, secretly taped audio recordings leaked by the newspaper O Globo, which is a pretty leading national newspaper, revealed the president discussing hush money payoffs with José Batista, the businessman who runs the country's biggest meatpacking firm, JBS, prompting talk of trying to impeach him. And on Wednesday, the 24th of May 2017, thousands of angry demonstrators marched towards Congress demanding Temer's resignation and immediate, direct presidential elections. On its face, this is definitely not a good thing, right? Obviously. But it got worse because he decided to meet this resistance with what, according to many photographs and testimonials, were very violent riot police who really stamped down and enforced this rule. But since Eduardo Cunha still remained the chief of the lower house of Brazil, and even after he left, there was someone who remained loyal to him leading that lower house. There was no real impeachment proceedings that could happen. There's nothing that could be pushed through to challenge this guy, even though he enjoyed a approval rating, as I said before, anywhere from 2 to 7%. He was horrifically unpopular. So that on its own proved to be a pretty devastating blow to him. And finally, he was only able to finish out what was originally the last 2 years of Dilma Rousseff's second term until 2018, when it was time for another election. The thing was, in Brazil's constitution, there are obviously term limits. You can only on serving consecutive terms, not how many terms you can serve overall. You can serve, for example, 2 terms from 2002 to 2010, but you have to take a break if you want to serve more terms. Lula Inácio da Silva was very much done with his break and ready to run again in 2018. As it turns out, the most popular politician in Brazil, and even the whole entire continent, some would say the northern, southern, eastern, and western hemispheres, was not popular with Brazil's elite. You may think because he's a socialist, but his policies didn't exactly attack the rich in a way that many socialist policies do. I mean, their taxes really stayed relatively unchanged, and they thrived under Lula's rule. So why did they hate him? Some people, including Glenn Greenwald, the executive editor of The Intercept, who you'll hear a lot more about in this very episode, realized that it was kind of a push against the idea that there was a peasant, who they viewed as a peasant running the country. Where this guy, he came from intense poverty. He worked in factories. He was illiterate at the age of 10. Like, this guy was not fit to be leading the country in their mind. And the fact that he did, and was incredibly good at it, very popular while he was doing it, immensely disturbing. After this, they kind of knew. They came to the realization that he was going to run again. He made it clear that he was going to run again. So, sooner or later, it really became clear to these people that Lula should not be and would not be allowed to be president for even 8 years. And finally, the blow came down, because on July 12th, 2017, Lula was convicted with money laundering and passive corruption, defined in Brazilian criminal law as the receipt of a bribe by a civil servant or government official. And more specifically, what he supposedly did was he received a seaside apartment in a very nice spot in Brazil, I must say, that really was in acceptance, or in return anyway, for contracts awarded to the construction company OAS. He was found guilty of that in July, and a 3-judge panel upheld the conviction in January, and Mr. Da Silva asked the country's top 2 courts to allow him to remain free, while other appeals were considered, but his petitions were, and this is kind of unprecedented, rejected. As the trial process played out, there were some definite irregularities in the case that drew a lot of eyebrows. Here's a news article from the time from Brasil de Fato, which was quite effective in outlining some of the irregularities in his case. For example, on several occasions throughout the trial, Lula da Silva's legal defense team have provided evidence that the former president never received benefits other than his salary and gifts routinely bestowed upon any head of state. Meanwhile, the prosecution has failed to provide any legal evidence that can prove that Da Silva committed a crime. Out of 73 witnesses to take the stand, not a single witness for the prosecution has provided concrete evidence linking the apartment to the former president. They can't even legally prove they own it. All he could do is prove that he visited it one time. So, yeah, again, they've not been able to provide any documents, any legal proof, any certification that this apartment actually belongs to him, making it very hard for him to really look like he accepted that bribe, because they couldn't even prove that he owned the piece of property. Yeah, that was one of the pretty big irregularities in the crime. Another one of the weird things was the judge, our good friend Sergio Moro, back in our lives again. And this was kind of bad news for Lula, that Sergio Moro is back on our lives, but it's good news for us, because we love, of course, Sergio Moro. This is because Moro wanted to take this moment to apply a broad, in his words, application of the law to fight corruption in general. Media portrayals called Moro a hero, and he actively encourages, kind of letting him get to his head a little bit. And he also even wrote a book about the Lava Jato scandal and the whole saga, with his face on the cover, profiting from it. And even worse, it negatively depicted Lula, the defendant he was literally about to try. And this was something that was pretty unprecedented at the time in legal history. Like, it was kind of eye-rolled a little bit, because it was someone who, at the time, at least the Brazilian people largely respected to a high degree, because he was the one, obviously, was presiding over this scandal, putting all these heavyweight corrupt guys in prison. but there was further irregularities. Went from bad to worse to